Welcome, everyone. Good evening, and I greet you all with the joy of our Lord, and thank you for joining me again tonight. And I am unfortunately having to power back up, so I want to say hello to all of you. Welcome to this congregational conversation where we'll be exploring, here we go, where we'll be exploring some concepts around these religious and political divides. It's really hard for us to talk about religious divides without talking about the political arena because they're mixed up in this great big bag, and they have come to a full-blown experience, if you will, for us. So that's kind of what we're working through. We're trying to understand all the many puzzle pieces of these dynamics. And there are many puzzle pieces of these dynamics. So I thank you all for hanging with me as we kind of unpack some of these things. Just so you'll know, this is not exactly Bible study, but later on we're really going to get into some text from the Bible as well and kind of dig in that way. But we're looking at a broader picture from a wider range as it relates to our relationships with each other in the religious community and beyond. So I'm just checking with my YouTube family here, and I see you in the room. And if you all haven't already, if you could say good evening as you already are, I welcome you. It's good to see all of you in here. Thank you so very much. And Facebook Live family, I know you're in the house as well. I thank you. You all are invited to share the feed if you want, and invite others to come into this conversation. Tonight we'll be kind of exploring, we've gone from the Enlightenment age up to now, from religious angles, from political angles. We've kind of looked at all of these things. Tonight, we're going to look at how black conservatism has grown, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Hello, Facebook friends. It's good to see you all as well. I am happy to greet you guys, and I hope that my computer will be kind enough to keep me in touch, and I will come back and check for questions periodically. All right, let us just pause for God's blessings, and we'll jump in. God, for this day we give you thanks. We thank you for the abundance of your grace and mercy and care. We thank you for an opportunity to have conversation and what it looks like and what it means for us to be your disciples in a world filled with noise and conversation and preaching and lecturing and posturing. God, center us and fill us with your directional path that we might live in accordance to your will and to your way. We pray this in Jesus' name, our Lord. Amen. So we can get started with conversations on how have the black community responded to how has the black community responded to some of the elements around conservative thought, liberal thought, and most people often think that African Americans have always been Democrat, for example. But to be honest, there has always been a large number of black Republicans and those who were sympathetic to the Republican Party because it was the party of Lincoln. And in the days of the 1860s, there was a huge move from the South, for example, as newly freed slaves made their way to the city of Washington, D.C. and take up camp there. So Washington, D.C. historically has been largely black. The areas of Georgetown, Capitol Hill, Those Southwest DC, those areas surrounding the seat of the federal government, the African American community largely occupied those sections of town simply because they thought it was safer to be close to the president. It was safer to be close to Abraham Lincoln. And for the most part, the Republican Party, prior to 1963, 1962, maybe even 1964, was anti-slavery. They did not support slavery as a whole. The Democratic Party had deeper roots in racist rhetoric and politics and things of that nature. So they started to develop more liberal stances. John F. Kennedy brought some of these liberal concepts. FDR, Harry Truman, brought some of these liberal concepts, and it was always a challenge within the Democratic Party about matters of equality and race relations. So LBJ turns up the heat and really pushes for legislation that is undergirded by the civil rights movement, that is created in consultation with the civil rights movement, and that is in support of the civil rights movement. So you get your Voting Rights Act passed, you get your Civil Rights Act passed, you get a lot of programming for black communities passed and supported, Head Start and things of that nature. You get funding into the community, and this even grows under the Carter administration. There's departments of education that create various title programs for lower income communities. That includes free lunch and free access to care around special needs and things of that nature. But this really turned in the early 60s when the Democratic Party abandoned Lyndon Baines Johnson and moved with some of their racist rhetoric and some of their racist concepts to the Republican Party. And some of those Republicans came over to the Democratic Party. So I mentioned earlier in one of our conversations that you will hear some say, well, the Republicans, we've always been open. That's not true. You always have to ask which section of history. Are you talking about the pre-1960s Republicans or the post-1960s Republicans? And quite frankly, the Republican Party is still in an identity crisis as it relates to the rise of what we know as the MAGA movement. So let's just start with a background there as understanding how some of the political dynamics have included black thought. So those who were Republican typically were so because a Republican president ended slavery. And even in the 1860s, even when they couldn't vote, there were black communities that were supportive of the Republican Party because of Abraham Lincoln and some of the work that he was able to achieve. So we get to the 80s, and there's a Republican Revolution that we've talked about before. This is just review. The Republican Revolution includes a lot of power from Jerry Falwell with the moral majority. A lot of power from him. And now he galvanizes what we today call the evangelical church. He galvanizes basically white evangelicals who support or would support a particular candidate to encourage their agenda and undergird their agenda and lift up their agenda. And their choice was Ronald Reagan. And it's very interesting because not many people were really aware of this political machine of the moral majority. It only stayed around for about 10 years, 1979 and 1989. Not many folks were aware that Jerry Falwell was a powerhouse behind Republican dynamics, agenda, points of interest, core values. Ronald Reagan does not too closely align. He kind of stands as his own, but he certainly had support from those angles. And Ronald Reagan came off as a quietly religious individual, right? He didn't come off as a fanatic, or he didn't come off as somebody that's going to walk across the courtyard and hold up an upside-down Bible in front of an Episcopal church. He didn't come off in that way, but he did come off as a religious person with basic religious values, supporting family ethics, and tough on crime and things of this nature. So say no to drugs and all of those kinds of things. So he had a sort of a moral dynamic to his leadership. So this grows, and the black community starts to get engaged with for what I would suggest is a figure that might throw the black community in a tailwind for the first time. And I'm going to see, hold on now, I have a new gadget I'm playing with. So Marcus, all I got to do is, okay, there we go. Hold on. All right, y'all bear with me. I want to talk to you about right here. There are key figures that started to rise as it relates to black thought around conservative policies, conservative concepts, conservative theories. And what we ended up having is a person who would follow Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall retires, and there is a desire to place another black person on the bench. And now we're beginning to see what it looks like to invite black conservatism in the political conversation. And I'm going to jump. Yep. All right. Here we go. Mr. Your Honor, Clarence Thomas. Now, Thurgood Marshall, before he leaves, holds his final press conference. And he makes it clear that the best and the responsible thing to do is to secure the right person for the job, not any person or not somebody because they're black. I think Thurgood Marshall was a little more colorful with his language. And if you ever followed Thurgood Marshall, he was rather humorous, but he was very frank, a very frank gentleman. And he said, don't put in the wrong person or the wrong Negro. That's what he came out and said. I don't care, you put in the right person for the right job, making sure they are rightly qualified. And someone asked him in that conference, has he, as a black justice, improved lives of black people in America? And he said, as a justice, white, and as I've been on a court, white and black lives have been improved. He wouldn't allow them to push him into a black context where all he did and all he thought was how to help black people. He knew what his role was, and he knew what his work was. Clarence Thomas brings a lot of angst. And let's look at some of the things that he supports, some of his concepts. So Clarence Thomas, who is from a little town called Penn Point, Georgia, his philosophy is rooted in what? Self-reliance and deep skepticism of benign government intervention. But his primary impact is through his specific legal philosophy, originalism. Now let's hold this frame right here. Let's just hold this. What do we mean by originalism? Actually, we can go to the next one. What do we mean by originalism? When we talk about originalism, he is suggesting that the law should stay in its original context. The Constitution should be interpreted based on the original public meaning of the text, and done so at the time it was written. Now, what does this sound like to you, for those of you who've been hanging out? It sounds like the same way certain people read the Bible, does it not? Biblical inerrancy, does it not? The Bible should be read and interpreted in its original context. This was the rise of fundamental and conservative Christianity, and here we see the same context in reading the Constitution, that the Constitution cannot be considered outside or should not be considered outside of its original context. So when you approach things, if we can pull that back up, like belief in the living Constitution critique, he strongly rejects the idea that the Constitution's meaning should evolve with modern societal standards. Here is the same argument in religion. It's the same way people approach, for example, theology, biblical concepts. They have to be kept in their original context. There is no rationalizing of it. There is no transference of it in light of our context. So what it said then is where we should stay and put our thumb. And in the context of law, Clarence Thomas is considered an originalist. In the context of religion, this would be considered a fundamentalist. And in essence, they are the same thing. Are you with me here? Are we together? So the parallel that I'm inviting you to see is one with the legal imagination and one with the religious imagination. They are going in parallel, and they both are against what? Cultural evolution. And the reason there is cultural revolution is because there is an abandonment of things related to text in its original form. And the two texts we're talking about here are which ones? The Constitution and the Bible. So any abandonment leads to the cultural chaos that we have today. And this cultural chaos includes the rise of things like Black Power and the LGBTQ matter and feminism and womanism and liberation thought. All of these things are contradictory to the gospel in the eyes of those who are making their way through conservative elements. So their argument, as much as they like to think, I would suggest to you, their argument isn't really textual or legal or constitutional or biblical. The argument is cultural. They're struggling to keep a grip on the growing sense of culture that's getting out of control. Now, there are African Americans who think these same things. There are plenty of African Americans that think that culture is getting out of control. And some of this is related to, they would suggest, lack of fathers in the household, drug addiction, lack of religious strength and connectivity. All of these things, and in the conservative, people are LGBTQIA+, or whatever, people are that because the family system has broken down. So in their minds, for example, homosexuality is a result of a broken down system in biblical and in even constitutional originality and fundamental thoughts. Feminism and gender roles is a result of an abandonment of biblical belief systems. All right, so and the list goes on. Just pick someone. Even xenophobia, and the way we treat other nations, because now what you're going to see is a merger of national politics with Christianity, and this conversation began in its original context, or in its latest context, 50 years ago, 40 years ago. You're seeing a merger of religious faith and political patriotism connect. And we call this Christian nationalism. And there are African American people in the United States that support some of these concepts. The question, however, is, are they Christian nationalists? And that's something we'll look at. But if we can go back to this conversation around Justice Thomas, he is also supporting the concept of a colorblind Constitution, right? So he argues that the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause forbids all racial classifications by the government, and therefore affirmative action is illegal. Thomas believes racial preferences are both unconstitutional and patronizing. He argues that they create a stigma of inferiority. A stigma of inferiority. Now, if I can just say for a minute here, I don't, and then we're gonna go back to another gentleman named Thomas Sowell. I don't really have a problem with the theory that Justice Thomas supports, except Justice Thomas is where he is because of the system he denounces. I always have to take a minute after I make that statement. I just have to support that for a second. If some of these affirmative action clauses were not in place, it is highly possible that he would not be sitting on that court. And the outrage in the black community is that he has taken this opportunity from so many that would come behind him, so many young people who would come behind him. He benefited from it, but he's not willing to share that process with others and that opportunity with others. And as a result, he has forfeited his right to the cookout in the black community. This is where the rage is. Not to mention during this time, there was an extraordinary court case around him, around a black woman who was in her own right a powerful legal mind, Anita Hill, and even as a young kid, families were sitting in the living room watching this in a black community, building up data why Clarence Thomas may not be the best representative of black people, while he possibly subjects a black woman in this kind of oppressive series of hoops that she must jump through. But the Republican power base did not consider that as relevant to his work on the court. And he was approved. So I think you see the first really prominent black conservative, or one of the firsts, that is espousing theories that is largely in conflict with the black community. And that's a challenge there, all right? Now let's look at Thomas Sowell, who is also a conservative, but not totally, as is Clarence Thomas. He is an economist, a brilliant thinker in economy, and he's known for his staunch advocacy of free market capitalism and his critiques of government intervention. Clarence Thomas also critiques government intervention. And what we mean by things like government intervention are programs that support persons that give them access to opportunities. You see here his economic theory is a synthesis of Chicago school economics influenced by Milton Friedman and Austrian school insights influenced by F.A. Hayek. His core philosophy revolves around the idea that economics is not about solutions, but about trade-offs. And here we run into, at this point, we run into the possible departure of him with ordinary black theory. Because for many black people, the economy, which excludes them, must find a way to give people opportunities and solutions because it always has. The economy always has done this. For example, when the Italians came to America, they were given plenty of land to cultivate. Some of the Germans, the same thing. But black people were told to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, right? So this kind of concept is at conflict with with many in the black community and with the liberal base, because economy trade-offs only work for the rich and not necessarily for people who are struggling. They only work for that group which W.E. Du Bois would call the talented 10th, in a sense, even in black America, all right? So as we continue to look at him, he defines economics as the study of the allocation of scarce resources which have alternative uses. So he emphasizes that scarcity is a fact. There's never enough of anything to satisfy everyone's desires. So he pushes for trade-offs versus solutions. Policies should not be judged by their stated goals, but by the incentives they create and the trade-offs they require. Policies should not be judged by their stated goals, which is ending poverty, because you're not going to do it, but by the incentives they create and the trade-offs they require, right? He is a vocal critic of rent control and minimum wage laws. He argues that they distort market signals, leading to shortages in housing or surpluses in labor, unemployment, which ultimately hurt the very people they are intended to help. Basically, all of these programs, in his mind, actually keep people where they are. People aren't going to rise out of their scenarios by the programs they have. So his recurring theme is that human beings respond to incentives, not to the intentions of policymakers. Unlike many mainstream economists, Sowell incorporates history and culture into his analysis of inequality. So here's a person who also, and he's about 95 years old today, and his economic theory is that he's not denying racism. He's not denying that people are, there's a class of people that don't have access. What he's struggling with is the solution to eradicate these issues are not by constantly giving them handouts. And one of the undergirding principles of conservative thought is things that bother, things that happen around the concept of what's known as the welfare state. The more we give handouts to people, the more we cripple society, and the more the government will have an extraordinary weight in caring for people who will never get out of their situations. This is a tenet of conservatism. And this is why there are some black people that are conservative, but the conservative they are often is moral, not necessarily economic. Moral, not necessarily legal, but there is some. So Shelby Steele is the next person I would like to talk to us about tonight and introduce to our conversation as we go deeper into this conservative development of thought, especially around identity as victimization. He's best known for his provocative analysis of race relations, identity politics, and the psychological impact of the civil rights movement aftermath, which is what? His core belief centers on the idea that individual agency and personal responsibility are the primary drivers of success, rather than government intervention or group-based identity. All right? His core beliefs center on the idea, and I see there's some movement in the chat, and I'm going to get there in a moment. But his core beliefs center on the idea that individual agency and personal responsibility are the primary drivers of success, not handing people things. Not handing people things, rather than government intervention or group-based identity. All right? And let's continue to look at some of his. So he coins this concept with victimhood identity. He argues that since the 1960s, a victim-focused identity has become the form of currency in American politics. So his thing is, let's deracinate, is his term, social policies. Let's take color out of all of it. Let's just get colorblind. Let's get colorblind and move on. All right, let's go to the next. So here's some of his major works. The content of our character, explores the psychological factors behind racial tension, white guilt. Sorry, I lost that. White guilt examines how the desire to avoid the stigma of racism has shaped modern American policy and culture. And shame, how America's past sins have polarized our country. He analyzes the polarization of the U.S. through the lens of the historical guilt and political ideology. And let me see if I can kind of help us make sense of this. White people, in his theory, are not supporting us or supporting black people because they care. They are supporting black people as an instrument of contending with white guilt. And to get the real support, we're going to have to stop demonizing white America in his mind. And because the more the black community demonizes white America, the more polarizing it makes. And the reaction to these concepts and dynamics are to bring the temperature down, but not really to infiltrate black community in a way where it has equity. All right? So let me pause here and just take a look at okay. Black people first started joining the Democratic Party because of the policies of FDR. Yeah, I think so, and more so Truman, and I would say following the Democratic, because in the 40s they weren't allowed to vote, so they could be, but black people have always been politically vigilant, and they've always been involved in party politics, national politics, international politics, global politics. They've always had a stake in that, and I concur that there were some who came over during the FDR administration, and what FDR did, quite frankly, that helped a lot of black people was his New Deal programs, what was known as the New Deal. And a lot of governmental agencies were established during World War II, and a lot of black people were hired by the federal government during this time because you have new governmental agencies, the Department of War, the Department of Labor, you got a lot of these, the Department of Transportation. There are tons of opportunities which has been afforded to African American people and also women, while a lot of the soldiers were at war and not at home. And a lot of those, by the way, a lot of those offices, a lot of those departments have been abolished under the Doge work by the current president and Elon Musk. So there has been a dismantling of these governmental agencies. Why? Because it is important for conservatism to keep government small and manageable in a way that the government is not spending so much money on that kind of infrastructure, and instead, they say, more money will go into the pockets of Americans. All right? Has that happened? By the way, I'm just curious. Okay, all right, moving right along. Here we go. Reggie White says, how can we hold this view when his job is to interpret the law in a given time and context? Someone interpreted the Constitution which allowed him to earn an education. I agree with you. I agree with you. For example, if we didn't interpret the law with growing contextual evolution, we may still not be able to vote. And I also would suggest that gun control laws, because the original purpose of gun control was to take up arms against Britain, in that there was not a strong army formed, and Americans were allowed to defend themselves against intruding foreign armies, not necessarily each other. So are we going to be strict with that ruling? That's something to think about. Yes, Dr. Walter Williams, who's in this thought camp, is worth the read. There are quite a few. Dr. Noel brings that to our attention. There are quite a few thinkers along this line. And these are things that we need to be aware of as we navigate our way with these conversations, all right? These are things we need to be aware of. I'm looking in Facebook, just checking on us. I want to make sure everybody is recognized and is heard. We're about to wrap up shortly because we're going to go, Marcus, I think we can go to the beginning where we talk about the foundations of the conservative movement. Slide 1. Hey, folks, I'm just checking. Thank you all so much. All right. Last week, it looks like we had 631 folks roll through Facebook on our conversation, so that's always a joy to welcome. All right, so here we go. Hasn't the white community demonized itself? Their own actions have resulted in the racial divide that we experience now. White people have made this a society that will probably never be colorblind. And I think you're right. I think to suggest this is, one of the many places where we disagree with Shelby and some in that camp, it's impossible to do anything in America in a version of being colorblind. That is philosophically, existentially, theoretically impossible, anthropologically impossible, sociologically impossible. All right, it is, politically impossible, even theologically impossible to do anything on American soil as a colorblind person. So when you see persons who don't say, I don't see color, the only way you can't see color is by seeing color and then choosing not to see color. That's why you know there isn't a color to see. So philosophically, the argument is flawed because you cannot, I don't see color. But the only way you're saying, I don't see color is you looking at me and saying, oh, you're black, but I don't see that you're black. So what you might mean is that you're not taking my ethnicity, you're not taking my journey, my location, who I am, my groundedness, you're not taking that seriously, or you're refusing to acknowledge that. I know it sounds nice, but it really is kind of insulting. So these are the things that we need to be mindful of. So very good point, Counselor, very good point. Sister Renee, basically he's against anything supporting or enhancing. Yeah, you can see, you can see very much the rejection of these notions. Some of us are still mad. There are many with Clarence Thomas. There are many who feel that he has been harmful to the progress of black people, all the way to Harriet Tubman, for God's sake. But there have always been African Americans that have in some way connected with the white power base. Even in slavery, there were black Africans. There were Africans who, for a nice trade-off, exposed the villages so that they could be intruded and stolen and kidnapped and taken to American soil where they would be enslaved. And because African people knew freedom very well, even on the boat they weren't taking it, and some jumped off because they would rather be dead than enslaved to anybody or caged to anybody. So the horror of these things are still very much among us and upon us. And to pretend that we'll all start from the same starting line and to pretend that we all have the same access to things is just intellectually dishonest. All right, so y'all are with me here. I appreciate you. We're going to close out with some of, Reverend White, if personal responsibility is paramount, shouldn't that apply to corporations also? That'll mean eliminating tax cuts for the top 1% and largest corporations. Absolutely. And you see, this is what the conversation always is. Underneath all of these conversations, there's a question sitting at the bottom, and that's this: what do we do with the black people? What do we do with the blacks? Right? That question is there. And there are two approaches to it. One side says we provide them with resources. We provide them with opportunities. The other side says, what do you mean, what do we do with them? They got to hustle like everybody else. They got to get up and make a living like everybody else. And persons that are arguing on both of these sides, in many cases, are black people. There are blacks that suggest we got to provide programs, opportunities. There are blacks who suggest, hey, they got to get up and work like everybody else. That's what I did, right? So those are the two competing ideologies. Now let's take another look at, and then we're done. Thank y'all. I want to make it shorter this time so we can hang in here and last through some of these concepts. Last week I was an hour, well over an hour. I think I was an hour and 15, 20 minutes, I think. I said an hour and 45 minutes. I don't think I was that long, but I was pretty long last week. So let me wrap this up with some foundations of black conservative thought. And I think it's important for us to just take note of these things so that we can be certainly in line to what the religious divide is and what the political divide is. The political divide and the religious divide are not very different among conservatives. All right? One is personal responsibility, free market economics, critique of welfare state, and a critique of liberal civil rights policies. All right, so let's look at personal responsibility a little bit. Now, this personal responsibility concept, I argue, is very much one that happens to be at many of our dinner tables at night with some of our own kids. So I again draw some lines around African American thinking that is very much in alignment with conservative thought. So, personal responsibility, for example. The state of being accountable for one's own actions, choices, and obligations. It involves a willingness to accept duty and reliability without relying on external forces to blame. Key aspects include owning outcomes and exercising self-control. So I'm going to keep this slide up a little bit because this is a huge piece. And this is what is often told to teenagers and children. And what do we say? If somebody jumps off the bridge, are you going to jump off with them? If somebody does that, are you going to follow them just because they're doing it? You have to own and take accountability for your actions, which means what? You have to get up early, you have to go to class, you have to turn your homework in so that you can get good grades. And when you get good grades, you can get scholarships. And when you get scholarships, you can go to college. You have to stay out of trouble. Even I have said to my own children, my own boys, I've been very honest with them. In my opinion, sons, it's nothing for a black man to do after 11 o'clock in the streets. Be at home. You don't need to be out 12, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5 o'clock in the morning. What you doing out there? Go home, right? Because a lot of stuff happens. And you have to be responsible as much as possible for what you do, who you hang with. Have we not said these things to our children? Who you hang out with, birds of a feather flock together. Be mindful of the crowd you keep, the company you keep. Some of this is grounded in the concept of personal responsibility. And what the notion is that black people are not responsible for their own actions, and they blame everybody else for their victimization. And you do have a strong black conservative voice that believes in these concepts. All right? So that's personal responsibility. And we have to think about whether this is the kind of message, is this what we should say or not? It may be. I don't know. But I want us to be aware that some of this is grounded in how we treat young people. And some of these young people, we have, you know, when my children were in the womb, they were being read to. We wanted them to be able to read efficiently by 3 years old, by 4 years old. We wanted them exposed and educated. And so by the age of 15, many of our youth were just as sophisticated, culturally advanced, and educated as many adults and many college graduates. What they didn't have, however, is the wisdom that accompanies some of these life situations. So we had a really smart generation, but one that was deeply miserable. And because we've raised them to be educationally astute, that comes with that is their ability to critique their parents' generation and their parents' concepts, their parents' theories, their parents' ideologies. And in many cases, it has unraveled the concept of personal responsibility or respectability politics. And now you have generations that work at places not because of what they can make, but because these corporations and these entities align with their core values. So you have young people now that are not working if you're not giving me Friday off. But we grew up where you better work on Friday and half the day on Saturday. But some of our kids, no, sir. No, I will not. No, that infringes upon me becoming a whole person. And I am not going to let you dominate my life like you dominated my mother and my father's life. I'm not going to let you control me the way you controlled my parents. I'm not doing it. I will not. And they don't. I'm just putting that out there for you. All right? And that's how some of these things unravel and grow and create what we're experiencing and what we're seeing now. So no, if I can't be whole, I'm not working 50, 60 hours a week. I'm not doing that. For what? Because you're devaluing the other aspects of my life, and that's not healthy. All right? So let's look at the next slide, which is free market economics. And what we have here is, A free market is an economic system based on supply and demand with little to no government intervention. Prices, wages, and production decisions are determined by voluntary exchange between private sellers and consumers rather than centralized control. Key characteristics include private property rights, competition, freedom of choice. So what is happening here in this regard is pull the government out of having so much dominance in the economic realm and let people compete. So you see a quick drop-off of governmental employees, an immediate system where they're hiring contractors, for example. The government shouldn't be determining wages and prices and all of these things. There are policies and regulations in place, but that shouldn't be the case. That's not the route to economic prosperity. This is a strong conservative point, which is why when you hear someone like Bernie Sanders talk about insurance for everybody, he's called a socialist because he is not really supporting a free market economy. And that's where you see some conflict there, all right? Let's move to the welfare state. And then we're on our way. Thank y'all for hanging. Let's talk about the welfare state here. Now, the term welfare state refers to a type of political system in which government plays a key role in the protection and promotion of the economic and social well-being of its citizens, often rooted in the principles of equality of opportunity, equitable distribution of wealth, and public responsibility for those unable to avail themselves of the minimal provisions of a good life. Frequently used in a derogatory sense to describe a state of affairs where the government creates incentives to access welfare benefits that are beyond reason, resulting in an unemployed person on welfare payments, earning more than a struggling worker. The welfare state is sometimes criticized as being a nanny state. So let's be clear that many conservatives are against this kind of level of support because they basically feel that it keeps black people lazy, or it keeps people who are on welfare lazy. And it's an inequality because people on welfare, in the minds of some of these, don't work nearly as hard as people, don't work nearly as hard as people who are working out here every day, but they get paid equal or more pay through welfare systems. And some, quite frankly, are on welfare because of disability reasons or whatever, if you use that term. Welfare has become a politically incorrect term to use, but it was very much prevalent in the 70s and 80s. And even for young people, if you said that somebody was on welfare, those were fighting words because it was a form of ugly classism. And Section 8 housing was a result of that in many cases. We no longer say Section 8 housing anymore. Those things were insulting, and you're not helping people. And there were groups, the disparity was seen because the Section 8 housing people were all lumped together. And as time moved forward, you can't tell who's living in a Section 8 house anymore because they are scattered throughout a particular geographical region. And so these places were once known as the ghetto, if you will, or ghettos, where everybody kind of lived in the same kind of environment. And black conservatives, along with the Conservative Party, did not think that these programs were beneficial to black people. They thought that it actually kept black people in bondage. And if we were together, I would, invite your opinion on that and what you think about that. All right, let's move to the last one for tonight, critique of liberal civil rights policies. And some of that, of course, includes things like, affirmative action, for example, and that's a big piece. So critics of race-conscious admissions and hiring, figures like Clarence Thomas, Sowell, argue that these policies create a mismatch effect in universities and cast a shadow of doubt on the genuine achievements of black professionals by suggesting they only succeeded due to a handout. So they advocate for a strictly colorblind system where merit is the only metric, merit only. But the question is, if we don't have access to the merit, to live in this kind of quality product, if college education is getting more and more expensive every day, and fewer black people are going to college, then could it not be considered that the system, as being suggested here, is actually a hindrance and a barrier to black excellence and black productivity? And many blacks will say, this is not, by the way, a handout. This is something that you owe us. This is something that is due us. Our foreparents, they would suggest, built this country's economic system. And the least you can do is care for its descendants in a way that you've cared for everybody else. All right? So these are the things that make it tough. And I'm going to say one last thing here before we go. But I'll recognize, let's see, Dr. Noel says, in my opinion, the true spirit of affirmative action is to ensure equal access to both resources and opportunity and to allow people to both succeed and fail on one's own. And this is critical because no one is asking for a favor. And affirmative action isn't a favor, in my opinion. Affirmative action is a measurable accountability source to make sure that everybody's being looked at and reviewed and considered. We have here countries that uplift and are supportive of citizens, welfare state countries, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Canada, and France, and they are doing well. They are very humanitarian-based countries. Many of these countries mentioned here, they have free health care, and it's not an issue. That's right. You know, so we're talking, so legacy issues, strictly merit-based issues would cut out all of the legacy admissions that many use to gain access to universities and employment. Let me tell you, there is affirmative action whether you take it away or not. The question is who has access to it and who benefits by it. Because if somebody can enter college because of who their parents are, that quite frankly is a form of an affirmative action. It's just not government-based or government-supported. So you see the conflict. And next week, we're going to go a little deeper into what we're seeing now with black support of Donald Trump. All right, so we're going to kind of unfold that next week. But friends, let me tell you what we must be mindful of. We have to do the work of research and study. Because once ignorance becomes a pandemic, it is very hard to change minds of people who haven't studied nothing. Like you hear folks on social media, you're a commie, and you ask them what communism is and they can't tell you. You're a fascist, they can't tell you what that means. Oh, you want to take away, I like affordable health care. I'm not into this Obama thing. It's the same thing. And what we have, I hate to say it, what I worry about is that we have a bunch of people that are uninformed and riding off of emotion and media frenzy, and yet they don't know that some of the very policies they are supporting are hurting them. You're closing hospitals down in smaller communities? Smaller communities? Well, where are you going to go when you get sick? Where are you going to take your grandfather? Because you might not have a car to drive 40 minutes to the hospital in a major city. These are things that we have to think about. And these are things that we have to raise. All right, friends, thank y'all for tonight. Let me remind you that I try to keep this from being a bias-based conversation, but I do want us to see all the angles of how different things emerge that cause our rise of division. And again, I'm not trying to isolate anybody. I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad. I have, respect for many conservatives that have stood up. Colin Powell is one of them. I think he was a very strong patriot, an American, who were not blinded. He was not blinded by political loyalty. He was able to speak to a variety of things with depth and understanding. And I think that's what we have to try to encourage. Do the research, do the study, and do the reading. Do the reading. All right, folks. Thank y'all. I appreciate your time. Thank you, Sister Irma. Yes, Brother Rod, we're definitely going to pray on that for next week. And let's continue to make our way through. Y'all are doing good work. I thank all of you in here. It looks like we got 71 in YouTube right this second. And thank you all on Facebook Live. I appreciate you. Yes, Sister Martin, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right on how affirmative action has been used. I concur with you on that. All right? Looks like we have 27 currently in Facebook. So thank almost 100 of you for being with us tonight immediately here. I appreciate you, and I am looking forward to seeing you on Monday. Take care of yourselves out there. Do the research, do the study, and be ye informed. Go in peace. Thank y'all.